This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. After experiencing trauma, I went to therapy, and my therapist guided me through a difficult time in my life. They helped me understand what was happening and provided me with tools to cope and find my own strength and resilience. Their experience and compassion were invaluable and enabled me to rebuild my life and move forward. I strongly believe in the power of therapy to help people through difficult times. BetterHelp connects you with a licensed therapist who is trained to listen and give you helpful, unbiased advice. First, you go to their site. You can use my link, betterhelp.com/resilience. You answer a few questions, and BetterHelp will match you to a professional who has years of experience helping people with struggles just like yours. Let BetterHelp connect you to a therapist who can support you, all from the comfort of your own home. Visit betterhelp.com/resilience or choose podcast, then notes on resilience during sign up and enjoy a special discount on your first month. Hello and welcome to Notes on Resilience. I'm your host, Manya Chilinsky. My guest today is Barry Furey. He is a public safety consultant, trainer, and speaker. And today we talked about resiliency in the public safety world and the movement towards empathy in that arena, the importance of upfront training on how difficult the job is going to be, and how to look for the good in the bad. Enjoy the show. And please look for us on Apple Podcasts. Subscribe and leave a review. That's really helpful. Hi, Barry. I'm so excited that you and I are talking today.
Thank you. I am too.
So let's just dive right in. My first question before we find out who you are is I would like to know if you could have any superpower, what would that be?
As selfish as it may seem, I think invulnerability would be sort of the ultimate power. And if you had the ability to overcome every obstacle and be immune from harm, there's certainly an awful lot of good you could do by possessing that particular power.
Absolutely. Wow, that's a good one. I'm adding that to my wish list. Every time somebody says one I haven't heard of, I'm like, oh, I want that too. So thank you for sharing that. And now, Barry, let's just talk a little bit about who you are and what you do and why you and I are talking about resiliency today.
Okay, great. I have been involved in public safety for over 50 years. I began in a volunteer fire department back in 1970 in suburban New York. And in fact, I joined that 40 years after my father joined that department.
Oh, wow.
So I get some of my public safety from my father's family because my grandfather was a police officer.
Okay. So, it's in your blood.
Yeah, it typically, I mean, that is an expression, but a true expression in many cases. But along the way, I have served as a fire officer in 3 different states and as a 911 director in 4.
Wow.
I retired from full-time public safety in 2020 at my 50-year mark, but I am now involved in consulting and training and speaking on those issues.
Wow. Well, first of all, thank you for all the amazing work that I know that you've done throughout those years. I bet you have seen a lot of things happen to people, and I'm sure things have happened to you as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, and you certainly you talked about why we're here and the resiliency factor, and that's a big part of it. I don't know if any people who spend 5 decades in public safety that don't see or hear something that is just extremely upsetting. Of course, on the other hand, you see a lot of good things as well.
Right.
And, you also have some of those things, as you indicated, happen to you as well. So, there's certainly been numerous occasions, whether it is, again, having been a 911 operator at one point during my career path,
Mhm.
I've certainly heard things. I think many people don't realize that there is no good or bad side of town.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you could take horrendous domestic disputes in what might be a gated community,
Mhm.
and some people think, "Oh no, that doesn't happen here," and it does. And certainly there have been a couple of occasions where I have been the last person that talked to someone before they passed. So
Mhm.
that is one of the things that comes with the territory.
Right. Well, I can see where you're wanting to have the superpower of invulnerability a little bit comes from, because I'm sure some of those things as a first responder and as a first responder, a 911 operator, I imagine that there are some really quite difficult things that you hear and see and witness.
Yeah, and I think one of the things from the 911 side of this equation that adds to the stress level is that as things get busier,
Hmm.
and most 911 centers that I know of are extremely shorthanded,
Hmm.
that you don't, in those positions, many times know the outcome of a call. You may, in fact, take the
Yeah.
call, pass it off to someone else who actually does the dispatch, and the phone's ringing again, and you don't have time or to know just exactly what's happened to that person that, for example, you may have coached through CPR.
Wow.
You don't get a lot of feedback.
Right. For me, I think that would be so difficult, not kind of knowing the outcome, because I think you want it to be the positive outcome. So you want to know that somebody is okay. And I guess you just have to live with that uncertainty.
Yeah, I mean that's a big part of it, and perhaps there's also this God complex that people in public safety get, because if it's a really bad call or a really severe emergency, you want to be handling it. You have to develop this confidence in yourself that when
Mm.
everything is going to hell in a handbasket, you're going to go in there with a garden hose and extinguish the fires of hell.
Right.
So that's it. You really work for the positive outcome, and as many times as you do get a positive outcome, and many times that you don't, and sometimes we don't prepare ourselves emotionally to deal with that. Even though this is a repetitive action, you're faced with some sort of problem every minute of the day almost. But
Right.
we don't. Especially when I started, we were not prepared to deal with negative outcomes.
Right. Right. Well, it sounds like, though, that the industry, the public safety has changed, and you are starting to pay attention to the mental health side of things and resiliency and protecting the health and wellness of the 911 operators and the first responders and the other public safety professionals. Am I right about that?
Yeah, you're 100% correct. There's certainly a long way to go yet, but I read recently, and I can't think of the state, but that the telecommunicators in that state were now covered for basically mental health issues. That
Okay.
it was recognized that, hey, you should be granted time off and you should get workers' compensation type coverage for that exposure. And really, it's not that long now. It's perhaps a decade ago that the Northern Illinois University did a study on stress for telecommunicators, and they concluded that telecommunicators were exposed to the same trauma as first responders who were on the scene.
Yes. Yes, I can imagine.
And that's even going to get worse as we go along. I indicated every 911 center I know in the country right now is facing the same sort of labor shortages that
Mhm.
we see, especially during the pandemic. A lot of places you would go to McDonald's and it'd be closed inside and the drive-in might be open.
Right.
But, we don't have that option in public safety. There's sort of no alternative center to 911. But what is driving the stress even further is that right now, there is movement to it's a group of technologies that are collectively known as NG, or Next Generation 911.
Okay.
And part of that, when it's rolled out, will actually allow people who are reporting emergencies to provide live stream video of what's going on to the 911 center.
Wow.
So there are people who chose 911 as a public safety profession because they didn't really want to be out there in the mud and the blood.
Right.
But now it's being brought to their front door, so to speak. When I go out and talk to groups of telecommunicators, there is certainly an apprehension about, hey, what is that going to do? Do I want to watch somebody give CPR while I'm instructing them? Do I want to see a bad accident? Do I want to see an injury to a child? I mean, so it's bad enough listening to it, but now you're getting immersed in that experience.
Right. It's going to give a whole new layer to the stress and the exposure. So the podcast is Notes on Resilience. We've been talking a lot about resilience without using the word, but I'm curious, what do you think about the word resilience?
If I were to give it a one-word definition, I would say survival.
Okay.
Because if you do not bounce back from the negative factors that you experience in public safety, you are not going to survive in the profession. You are not going to survive as a sane human being. Mm-hmm. And in many cases, the people who you are attempting to help aren't going to survive because you have to maintain focus throughout. It's kind of interesting. When I started back 1970, different time, different mindset, terms that we are in the vernacular today, commonly in the vernacular, weren't even invented yet. I mean, PTSD, what's that? And it was a sign of weakness if you had any emotional response to a call.
Yes.
Yeah, it was pull your boots up and keep on trucking. And that's been a really, really big change as time goes on. And I know when I started, one of the big things on the 911 side, and we'll talk about my fire experience later, is that you were told, oh, don't display any emotions at all. Mm-hmm. And as a director, as I hired people, I didn't want that. I wanted somebody who had some empathy for the caller. I'm not saying you break down and cry in the middle of the call, because you're certainly not helping anybody. But I would rather have somebody who, after the call, would be like, whoa, gee, I just need to step back here for a second.
Right.
And got a connection with the caller during an emergency, because that is so critical to giving good service. I always told my folks, be polite, be kind, be attentive, because over the years, I have seen or received more complaints for people who thought they were dismissed or had a rude experience.
Yes.
Rather than somebody completely screwed up the call. I mean, it's hysterical. Somebody could have really made an error, but if they're nice, the caller was like, oh, gee, I had a great call. Right.
So, you talk about the way the profession, both, I mean, we're talking about a couple of things here, but public safety in general, but 911 operators, who I like to call the first responders, and then the people we think of as first responders, fire, police, paramedics. So I still today have spoken to people who talk about, no, I don't let any feelings in. It's important to not have emotions when you're dealing with this. And I think there is that. I've still spoken to people who kind of think of that as a weakness. And I know the professions are moving towards a more empathetic place. How is that going? And what are the sticking points for really everybody kind of embracing that?
On the 911 side, one of the professional associations has a slogan, 911, one nation, one number.
Mm-hmm.
My definition of that is 911, one nation, one number, legislated 50 different ways by each state and delivered in approximately 5,500 different manners, because that's about how many 911 centers there are in the country. So I think overall there is an awareness of the impact and the need for allowing yourself to be human. Mm-hmm. I mean, to each his own in terms of how you want to handle it. And I think from the Stoic side, I think some people, you always got outriders.
Right.
So, I mean, some folks self-diagnose PTSD and everything else. And it was raining and I had a flat tire when I went to work, so I don't go to work anymore when it's raining, so I don't get a flat tire. I mean, that's the whole, but, and what you're saying, and, I guess you can see them both, but I think the industry, public safety in general, is moving in that direction. And I'm speaking at a international conference in August, and my topic there is get over it, how living in the past sabotages our future success. Mm-hmm. And that talks about our attitudes towards everything. So you are still going to have folks who are part of the problem and not part of the solution, to quote an old phrase. I really see a lot of movement in the more, it's okay to be human.
Yeah. Well, and what we're talking about too is back in the day, there wasn't a lot of institutional or organizational support there weren't a lot of organizational supports for mental health care or for it is okay for you to take time after this difficult call. What do you think is the role of the organizations or, institutions in being supportive of public safety personnel in the difficult work that they do?
Oh, it's a critical component. I know many agencies who progressively over the year, and speaking to all government agencies, have added some sort of an employee assistance program, mm-hmm. or whatever you want to label it, but it's no cost mental health care. Mm-hmm. I've seen the startup of many peer support groups, which I think is also important. Hey, wait a minute, here's somebody who really knows. And there are quite a number of chaplain corps for people who can find their solace mm-hmm. in religious counseling. So, I think it's critical, and I am really happy to see that it is on the increase and mm-hmm. the awareness is on the increase, but there's still a long ways to go, because sometimes reality rears its ugly head. Mm-hmm. And if you are involved in a disaster, let's say, and there are multiple emergencies popping up one after another, and you mm-hmm. handle a really difficult call, you may not be able to just step away, because there's nobody who's going to handle that next emergency coming in if you don't answer the phone.
Right. It's fascinating to hear that your experience and to be thinking about 911 operators in particular in this way. I think especially you mentioned that it's one nation, one system, but it's really thousands of different centers and different systems. And I know from my experience that they all work on different technologies, and some can do X and they can't do Y. But as the public in the US, it's just, I'll call 911 if I need help. And to us, it is this big single entity. So it is fascinating to learn more about some of the challenges Because we call you when something bad happens. For some of us, it's the worst thing that's ever happened to us. And we really lean hard on you. And we have certain expectations that may not be reality given what the system really is.
That's a great point. For even what you touched on, there is not universal technology involved. Yeah, the phone rings, you answer it, you send help, but several different vendors on all this equipment. While there are national standards in terms of how some of the things are supposed to be handled, a lot of the quote standards in the 911 field are kind of like best practices and strong suggestions, but
Okay.
there's no 911 police that comes along to an agency and says, hey, you didn't do that right. So you've got that to deal with. Training is all over the place.
Yeah.
Some people have literally none. It's kind of what I call, we all know plug and play when it comes to computers. You bring this thing home, get it out of the box, plug it in. Oh, okay, the printer works. I call the training or lack of at some 911 centers as plug and pray. They
Oh
plug,
no, Barry.
they plug. I'm serious. They plug somebody's headset in and they pray they don't kill somebody in the next 10 hours.
Wow.
Yeah, it's again, that's getting better.
Yeah.
But to see the haves and the have-nots
Mm-hmm.
in public safety.
Yeah. Yeah.
I talked about being a fire officer in 3 different states. In one of the states that I was a deputy chief in, we had an $18,000 annual budget for the fire department.
For everything you needed to do.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so and in fact, we were not as bad off as some folks. We had good community support. Of course, this is back in the 1990s, and our only what we call Class A engine, or that's actually the pumper that delivers most of the water onto the fire, was older than the apparatus I used back in 1970 when I joined the fire department.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
So 911 is not the only thing that is variable.
Right.
All
Right.
emergency services are haves or have-nots in this country.
It's so interesting because again, as the public, these are in a lot of places, these are things we expect. We can make a call and someone's going to show up and they're going to have the right equipment and they're going to be able to take care of it. And I know that is the desire of the first responders and the dispatchers and the operators. But I don't think it can always be the case, just given the realities of investments and labor and all of those things.
Yeah.
So what do you think is an important lesson about resilience and compassion that you've learned because of all of your work in public safety?
As much as possible, try to maintain balance in your life. When your position in public safety becomes almost your identity,
Mm-hmm.
it really aggravates any issues you've had to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
Because you almost are dehumanized to a fact in that, oh, that's Officer Jones, oh, that's firefighter McDougal. There's not even at some point a first name involved.
Right.
And there is no concept of what this person is like away from job. Are they married? Do they have kids? Where do they live? They have dogs? What are their interests? Who are they as a person?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I can tell you that I dedicated too much of my life and too much of my identity to
Mm-hmm.
that. It's a little late in life now, but that I am doing consulting and doing training and essentially picking and choosing, doing it at my own point. I've got time to spend with my family now that I never had before. I mean, we had a tornado pass in the next neighborhood to us on one occasion.
Mm-hmm.
My wife was pregnant and due in about 10 days.
Mm-hmm.
And I left her hiding in the bathroom with mattresses, and I had to go to work.
Wow. Yeah.
So that's what you give up. I'm certainly not saying that there's certainly benefits. And I mean, there's certainly a good feeling I think that you get knowing that you're doing good. But the older I get, the more I question not the personal sacrifices themselves, but the amount and the level.
Right, right. So you mentioned that you do consulting and I know you do training. And so I know that you are working with organizations to, improve upon what they're doing. So, what do you think is the most important action or policy that an organization can take to really be supportive of the resiliency for the first responders and dispatchers and the like, or, dealing with the trauma that they experience?
I think if I'm going to be focused on one thing, I would say, we've talked a lot about the support, but I think upfront training on the realisms of life is probably the best thing that can be done. Yeah, people are working on support, as we talked about with employee assistance programs, et cetera.
Mhm.
But I really believe that a greater understanding of, number one, what to expect, and number two, how to handle it.
Yeah.
Yeah, because if you don't know about the EAP or you don't know about other avenues, who do I contact if I have the problem? Or if you don't know that it's not unusual to feel the way you feel, it can be dumbfounded. I mean, that's one of the reasons why any of our new hires during the application process, I have always required them to sit in the 911 center with an experienced telecommunicator and put a headset on and listen to the calls. And over the years, I've had more than one person get up from their day in the center and say, "No, thanks, this isn't for me."
Yeah.
She called and she said, somebody shot. We get those kind of calls here. Well, yeah, that's kind of the purpose of 911. So I think it's really, really good. Let people know what they're going to expect. Let them know what to do when it happens, and learn how to manage that stress and realize, hey, you're not unusual for feeling how you feel.
Yes. I like that you said that it's normal to experience those kind of feelings. And I think that's an important message for anybody who's experienced something traumatic that we don't always do such a great job with. So as we're getting close to time that we have to wrap up, but what's one question you wish I had asked you, and how would you answer it?
I think that question would be, what is the worst thing that you have experienced, or what's a watershed incident, and how did it affect you? And obviously for me, I indicated that I started in public safety in 1970. In 1972, so I was out of high school 18 months or thereabouts. I responded as a firefighter to a call that involved a fully loaded school bus getting T-boned by a freight train.
Oh.
Okay. So these riders on the bus were sophomores when I was a senior. If I did not know them, because we were a fairly small town, I knew their older brothers and sisters, tight-knit community. It, literally wiped out one side of our town because of the way the bus route ran. 40 some odd injured. And when I say injured, I've seen a lot of trauma in my life. I mean, serious injuries.
Right.
5 people dead. I wound up, and this is me at 20 years old, wound up being a pallbearer for one of the victims because I played sports with him. I played sports with another one of the victims, and a level of trauma and the most I had saw during the rest of my career. And I saw some serious things.
Wow.
Mass casualty incident was a term, wasn't even invented yet again back then. Debriefings, PTSD, we didn't know. And I mean, so alternately, other than perhaps the death of my parents, the worst day in my life, and the other side, the best day in my life, it reminded me that as 20 years old, I was not bulletproof.
Yeah.
I was really kind of bumming around. I had received a full college scholarship, decided I didn't want to go, was doing job here, job there. And that happened in March. By July, I had gotten on the sheriff's department, assigned to dispatch.
Wow.
Got back into school part-time, paid for it myself, got my degree, and really pointed me in the right direction. Now, unfortunately, I don't necessarily always remember that lesson and find myself slipping a little bit. But I've got to say, it's, one of the things that really taught me that there's no guarantee, and that how sometimes you have to look really, really hard, but there's oftentimes good buried in the depths of tragedy.
Yes, absolutely. I really appreciate you sharing that story. That sounds like such a difficult experience for so many people, but it really looks like it shaped your life and the things that you do. So thank you for that. Now, I typically ask people, what would you tell your 18-year-old self about resiliency? But I feel like maybe you just answered that in what you learned from your experience at 20. But is there anything you would want to add to that?
Other than sort of combining that there are no guarantees, and, spend your time wisely and look for the good and the bad. It's so easy to find the bad in the good sometimes, or dismiss something, but really take a look and say, okay, what can I learn from this that's going to help me in the future?
Yeah. Oh, Barry, this has been such a fabulous conversation. Thank you for sharing so much. I know that you do speaking, you training and consulting. So how can our listeners reach you?
The easiest way is probably at my website, barryfurey.com.
Okay.
Or by email, my name, Barry Furey, BarryFurey @yahoo.com.
Excellent. And we will put links to that in the show notes for everyone to make it easy. Barry, thank you again. This was a wonderful conversation, and I appreciate the insight into the world of public safety.
You're welcome.
All right. Bye, everyone. Thank you for listening. I hope you got as much out of this conversation as I did. So if you'd like to learn more about me, Manya Chilinsky, I work with organizations to help understand how to create environments where people can thrive after difficult life experiences. And I do this through talks and consulting. I'm a survivor of mass violence, and I use my experience to help leaders learn about resiliency, compassion, and trauma-sensitive leadership, to build strategies to enable teams to thrive and be engaged amidst difficulty and turmoil. If this is something you want to learn more about, visit my website, www.manyachilinsky.com, or email me at manya@manyachilinsky, or stop by my social media on LinkedIn and Twitter. Thanks so much.